Good morning and welcome everybody to this edition of NYC Film Green Office Hours. My name is Shira Gans and I'm the Senior Executive Director of Policy and Programs at the New York City Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. In this role, I direct our Film Green program, which creates a sustainable blueprint for film and television productions in New York City. For those of you who don't know us, who are tuning in for the first time from New York or from around the world, the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment is New York City's film commission. We permit all on-location film production, and we also support all the creative sectors in New York City. We started Film Green to try to help the industry reduce the environmental impact on producing here, and we've grown the program to include webinars like this to do a deep dive into different sustainable film production topics. So I'm really excited for today because film is a huge industry for New York City, but film and television production is a global industry that's driving economic growth around the world. So I think it's really important as we think about the environmental issues that are facing all of us to check in with our colleagues from around the world to see how they're addressing some of the pressing issues we all face. So thank you if it is morning for you, afternoon, or late at night if you're tuning in from Australia. So without further ado, I will bring on all our amazing panelists from around the globe as we talk about global sustainable film production. Turn on your cameras, everybody. Do we all have our cameras on? Alissa, do you want to turn on your camera? Unmute ourselves? Okay, well, while Alissa does that. Okay, everybody. Sarah, I'm going to call you guys just to introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Sarah Tosone. I'm from Brisbane, Meanjin in Australia. I often also work at the Gold Coast as well. I work as an environmental film supervisor on the physical productions and also as a consultant. Recently, I've also worked with the Boomerang Alliance and with state government environmental agencies to work with reuse in workplaces.
Jennifer.
Thanks, Shira. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, wherever you are all joining us from. My name is Jennifer Sandoval, and I am calling in from Vancouver, Canada, in beautiful British Columbia. I am a sustainability consultant. I have been working in film and television for the past decade mostly doing supervising production and just the development of sustainable production in general for the global film industry in North America focused, but have worked on productions outside of North America. And most recently, I have been doing some work in sports production as the impact and sustainability manager for the Invictus Games, which just took place here. I'm also a board member of Producing for the Planet. We'll talk a little bit about that more today, a coalition of Canadian producers and the co-chair of the National Real Green Committee here in Canada.
Awesome. Alissa, who I'll note, Adrienne, her colleague, who's on the flyer, was not able to join, so Alissa has graciously stepped in his place.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alissa Aubenque. I'm the head of operations and international at EcoProd. I'm based in Paris, so right now it's the afternoon for me. Just a few words on EcoProd. We are a French nonprofit organization founded in 2009. And our aim is helping the film, TV, and advertising industry transform so it can reduce its environmental impact and inspire positive change. And we are an association, and we unite around 450 companies today who want to drive meaningful change in our industry.
Awesome. And April.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon from London. I'm April Sotomayor. I'm head of industry sustainability for BAFTA Albert. As an organization, we are sort of the home of environmental sustainability for the screen industries, mainly film and TV, but we also support games as part of our wider BAFTA strategy. We look after industry standards. I particularly look after standards and reporting through our toolkit, skills and culture, training and education, and decarbonization initiatives.
Amazing. So today I've had a chance to talk to all of our impressive panelists before, and I really tried to pull out some of the themes across the work that they're doing. So I just want to say up front that the work they're doing is amazing and extensive, and we won't have a chance, unfortunately, to dive into all of it. But we're going to touch on some of the interesting things that stood out to me as unique and possibly best practices for us all to think about. Before I jump into that, I also want to thank Anna Laura from Earth Angel, who helps us find all of our amazing panelists, which is no small feat when they're across the globe, and also to Nicole from our office, who perhaps you've been getting emails from. Anyway, so to get into the conversation, the first thing I want to touch on are themes around regulatory changes or creations of frameworks that move this work forward. So April, I want to start with you because you were saying something that I found pretty impressive, that you managed in your work across the industry and coalition building to have arrived at sort of a promise to go to fuel-free power sources, possibly within the year. I may be misstating that, so you can rephrase it, but I know we all struggle with diesel generators. It comes up a lot. But it can feel very challenging to get to a place of saying, okay, we're going to stop using those. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that work.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been, over the last year, we've been building out this kind of industry strategy and focusing on power was one of the key areas for us to drive forward because it's something that's within the control of the production, and it's also an area where we think we can more rapidly decarbonize. And there are lots of co-benefits from, getting those stinky, noisy generators offset, improving health, reducing the amount of fuel, reducing cost. And so what we've done as we formed an expert working group over the last 10 or 11 months that has really been looking at what are some of the enablers and some of the barriers, and how do we build a transition plan that will help to support, taking the industry along on a journey, but actually really quickly focusing on some key actions, which the first being trying to eliminate diesel from generators. And then thinking about, okay, that's not the first step. We want to get to zero emission power. So how can we do that? And what is the role of different ways of working, from hybridization of generators to electrification, tying into the grid, and use of other alternative technologies, use of hydrogen power, batteries. Where does that actually fit in? There's a whole lot of noise in the space. A lot of people have a lot of different views. And so what we wanted to do is provide some clarity, both for production teams, but also for the supply chain, so that they can actually supply the solutions at pace and at scale for the industry as we evolve on our net zero journeys. So we've done a whole range of consultations that actually kicked off late last year. We've been working with, and I also want to hasten to add that this is scoped for the UK, but I think that there will be some core principles that are widely applicable that we would really love for others to, borrow from, steal, do it, use it, make it fit for purpose in your area. We're all on this journey together. But we partnered with Liverpool. They received the UN Accelerator City status in November of last year, and that gave them the opportunity to actually pilot some labs. And so we were able to take control of one of those labs and invite suppliers and some production folks to workshop what some of the barriers enablers were, and essentially sense check the first version of our transition plan. And then we ran a structured consultation with suppliers that supply film and TV, but also a lot of them we found that supply live events. So I think that's another area that we can collaborate with in the near future as well. And so that was really to hear suppliers, what are the technologies, what are the limitations, what are the different use cases, how do we make that kind of flesh that out in our transition plan to really show people that we've thought this through, and that people can look at that transition plan as a roadmap, but also how they might apply it to their organization, because everyone's at slightly different stages on this journey. And that was a really successful dialogue with the suppliers that it has really helped inform kind of some of the tone, but also some of the actions that individual organizations will take in their approach. This is now sitting with a third party that's actually reviewing the techno-feasibility of some of the technologies and some of those use cases. And once that's sort of signed off, it will go back into our task force for a final review. And then ideally what we want to be able to do is support our membership, particularly our industry advisory group members, to put their logos on an industry statement that essentially says, we support this transition plan. Here's the transition plan. We've gone through this rigorous process of due diligence to help create this roadmap. And then for those that would support it, sign it in addition, we would expect kind of industry associations, membership bodies, production companies, suppliers as well to support that and embed it. And each of them will apply it in a slightly different way. But we hope that everybody will be very ambitious. And that first milestone is really trying to get rid of diesel.
And so that's amazing. Is there a role that film commissions or other regulatory bodies have played, or is this entirely an industry cooperative effort that will be voluntary? And if there isn't government involvement, is there a desire to do that to make it even clearer what the expectation is?
We've been having conversations with different people in government, certainly around some of the barriers which are infrastructural. So if mains power or grid power isn't available and you're filming on location, that's an issue. How can you be fuel free if you're not going to be able to get a reliable electricity supply? So that is a really key enabler, and that's a very big challenge. But also here in the UK, we've got a net zero strategy. The Department of Energy and Net Zero has just released their new strategy for this year. So, and electrification is certainly a big part of that, and decarbonizing the grid here is a huge priority. So this is very much pulling in that same direction, but it is allowing for the industry to really embrace what its role is and working with its suppliers to get there. There are additional challenges with things like funding and financing this transition. Suppliers want to know who is going to help them with this. Some of that is available. I think there's lots of different models in terms of various schemes on, whether it's venture capital or leasing innovations that we've seen already happening in the industry here, to access to funding and things like that at reduced rates or preferential rates, or just grants as well. And some of that's available in different regions across the UK. But the other thing is really also to have those that endorse this plan to support on the skills transition and the accountability, certainly from a production standpoint, to make sure that people are actually ordering that kit or changing their ways of working and making it safe for people to try something different, because that's a really essential and a key enabler for us to move forward.
Yeah, I think, a theme that comes up throughout these office hour conversation is really about setting the tone on set, and whether or not people at the top, be it the director or people, at the studio level, are really sending that message that those practices they want to see adopted. And then that creates more of a will. And also it also makes it okay because it's a stressful environment and people need to get things done under deadline. So when that message is clear, it leaves more breathing room, right, to say, okay, we can try this new thing. So, if folks have questions, because I could ask like 18 million questions about this, but I'm going to try to make sure we get to every panel. So in the audience, if you have questions that you want us to dive a little deeper in, please put them in the Q&A part. So Sarah, over in Brisbane, when we were speaking, you brought up this issue that I actually hadn't heard about and is alarming. And there are some interesting actions being taken over there. So if you could talk to us a little bit about what's happening with compostable packaging and how you guys are handling that.
Yeah, so in 2022, I was working on a production in Sydney, and midway through the shoot, I was contacting the compostable vendors just to make sure making sure our contamination was fine. And I basically, the New South Wales EPA has kind of stopped accepting compostable packaging in the waste stream due to PFAS chemicals in compostable packaging, and this is certified compostable packaging, as one of the reasons why they don't want to allow it. And so it's not banned at this stage, but it's something that is definitely the compost facilities are kind of avoiding, or they would rather not take. And it really does depend on each jurisdiction, each compost facility, but that really does kind of shake up the zero waste stations, and like to get a zero waste system happening on set, normally it's the compost, like composting everything to get that
Tell us what
reduction.
about, sorry to interrupt, but so PFAS, that's perfluorinated carbons, right? Do you want to give a 2-sentence
Yeah.
overview of what they are and why you don't want them in your body?
Yeah, so they're forever chemicals, and they're everywhere. So it's kind of one of those rabbit holes that you can go down, but it's kind of carcinogenic. It liberates on contact. That was something fascinating. So microwavable popcorn is very high in PFAS. So it's a chemical that is often sprayed in paper products because it's water resistant. So and it's just one of those things that companies like Biopack, which is one of the leading compostable packaging companies in Australia, they are working with their suppliers or their manufacturers to get those chemicals out. So compost facilities have got to kind of monitor the PFAS chemicals. It's something that is definitely looked into a lot more now. And so it's something to be aware of. Basically, it's kind of meaning that there's got to be a much more bigger shift to reuse. And I think that's where the industry is kind of going, not just in film, but across entertainment, large events, and to get rid of the single-use throwaway culture. So, and also it is rather than, there are some really great companies I can kind of talk about that are spearheading this. In Australia, Boomerang has been one of them, so working with governments. But basically, we're wanting to try to kind of look at the waste hierarchy, so reduce, reuse, recycle, and go upstream. So concentrate our efforts upstream into avoidant and reuse rather than downstream with recycling, which I know even with the life cycle of a compost, like with the single-use packaging, it's just not as good as reuse systems when they're really done well. So I see that as a major kind of shift in the way we're doing waste management in productions, not just on film, but across industry. And so government is definitely interested in a lot of behaviour change to get this done. And then there's also infrastructure. So, and there are some really exciting things that are happening on the ground. And some links I can send through as well.
You had a new, instead of reduce, reuse, and recycle, you had a new phrase that I thought was interesting.
Yeah. So it's kind of a bring, borrow, stay approach. So kind of bring your own as much as possible, especially if you prefer drinking out of certain materials. Borrow, so from a shared system. And there are companies that are kind of starting up borrowing streams, especially with there are circular cities that are kind of working with governments and councils there to kind of have drop stations in the community, but definitely in an enclosed work environment like a film production. It's kind of, it really is going to eliminate that visual waste and also reduce the footprint as well. Borrow from a shared system. And companies such as Circle, Muse is one in Canada as well. So there are kind of startup companies that are working towards different options that meet your criteria. And then the stay. So take your time and dine in. So it's those three kind of behavior change solutions to getting into a more reuse system.
Yeah, and I remember, so one thing I like about that, this came up maybe in our directing sustainably, the idea of taking into account human capital. So how do you run film and television production in a sustainable way in a kind of burnout industry? And so she talked about trying to make sure, you could wrap on time and not keeping people over if you didn't need to. And so the idea of creating space, actually sit down and have a meal. And we also had a company on called Redish on our sustainable food episode, which it was a company where you could hire them to bring in the plates and everything. And they found that after 4 uses of it was plastic, reusable plate, then it was more efficient. Like if something happened to the plate and it was thrown away, then the water usage outweighed the benefit. But that after 4 uses, you started to see gain. So I think that's an interesting model. Okay, so Alissa, over in Paris, I wanted you to talk a little bit about, again, sort of, we often think about, or I often think about advocacy work coming here from lobbyists. So you have an industry association who's going to be having a platform for, one view of the industry and advocating to policymakers to advance those goals. But Alissa, you were saying through your organization that you guys are more of a coalition across all these different companies, and you were able to you've been working to get sustainability metrics considered in different frameworks. So you want to talk a little bit about some of that work and what happened at Cannes?
Yeah, sure. So at the core of EcoProd is really that idea that we have to work all together, like everyone in the industry, towards that common goal of sustainability. And we believe also that the transformation will come kind of on two levels. On the one hand, there's this top-down approach coming from the institutions, from the policymakers, from the film funds, private and public, to set kind of ambitious goals and standards to push the industry. But then there's also the bottom-up approach, really coming from the ground, from the productions that do the actual work of changing our ways of producing. And at EcoProd, we try to join those two approaches and to work both with productions on actual tangible changes on set, and also work with the institutions to change kind of the rules of the game, I would say. And so, of course, for the groundwork, we have our toolkit with a carbon calculator, a certification scheme. We have different trainings for students, for film professionals, but maybe looking more at the top-down approach, how we work with institutions. So we've been working with both public and private institutions. And when I say institutions, I mean kind of everyone involved in financing and creating the rules for the way we produce. So one thing, for example, that has been happening in France is that the CNC, which is our national film fund and film commission, has been presenting like a few years ago, they presented their sustainability roadmap. And the first step in that sustainability roadmap was making carbon calculation mandatory for every project that applied for film funds. So for the last 1.5 years now, film productions need to hand in a projected carbon footprint and a final carbon footprint. But of course, we all knew when this was announced that this was a first step, and that it's not enough to just calculate our emissions. We actually need to reduce them. And so we've been working with the CNC and the government in creating a national sustainability standard that was released 1 year ago. So it's a list of 28 criteria on what we need to do to be considered as a more sustainable production. And at the film festival in Cannes, the CNC, so National Film Fund, announced that there will be a bonus of 28,000 euros for each production that follow these environmental standards and gets certified. And at the same time, we also work with a private company called Profil Loisir, which is a private investor, and they are also offering a new bonus of 20,000 euros for productions who get the EcoProd certification. And so I guess there are also other things happening more on regional levels, but the feeling we get is that those incentives are kind of both a signal to the industry that sustainability is becoming embedded into our production workflows, because the institutions are actually taking it seriously and adding it into the rules of the funding criteria. And also, of course, giving out bonuses, helping productions with actual cash to make that transition is a great way to, motivate them, but also help them actually invest in some of the things that we know do have a cost. For example, it can be help to hire a sustainability coordinator to help productions kind of kickstart their sustainability journey. And yeah, so we've seen that in France, there's like a strong, I would say, community-driven momentum. We have a lot of different industry stakeholders really working on this topic of sustainability. And I think especially in the times that we are in, where sustainability measures and regulations are kind of being toned down everywhere in the film industry, at least in France, we kind of see the opposite, that it's actually going quite well and getting more ambitious.
And so April kind of talked about in the work around generators, a very structured process of stakeholder engagement to arrive at this plan. So for these criteria at the national level that you're talking about, was there a process that you can speak to about industry engagement? Were there, like in the US, when you want to do, if we want to do a policy proposal, we have to have a certain number of public comment periods where people come and, get mad, or people, submit their thoughts. But I'm just wondering what the process is like in other places.
Yeah, I mean, there were two different times in that work. First of all, we as a private association, we drafted our own set of criteria, which are the ground for the EcoProd label. So it's a set of 80 criteria.
Okay.
And this kind of was used as a benchmark of existing best practices, and was used by the CNC and our Ministry of Culture to kind of kickstart the work on creating national standards. And to create those national standards, the CNC and the ministry, they invited industry professionals and sustainability professionals. I think there were around 120 people who were actually involved in the different working groups. It lasted around nearly 1 year. So we had different working groups looking at transportation, looking at energy, at waste management, at all the topics, but also social sustainability, because we all know environmental and social sustainability are linked and need to be looked at together.
Like, what's an example of social sustainability criteria out of the 28? If you, not to put you on the spot. But.
Well, in France, there's been a lot of pushing to fight against sexual harassment. So that's one of the criteria, for example, but also having gender equality in the team, for example, that's another social criteria, but also just maintaining the well-being of the team. You mentioned the burnout industry, so kind of trying to push against that.
Okay, so I kind of want to switch over to Jennifer, because some of the things you're talking about, Alissa, resonate with some of the things you were talking about, Jennifer. So two things, really. I mean, the P4P is a sort of industry coalition building and advocacy. So maybe you could speak about that a little bit. And then you also, so it's sort of foreign to us in the US that the government in other places gives industries money in the arts. But, you were saying that in Canada, there's been a shift towards including sustainability requirements, and, like tax credits here are kind of in a way a rebate. So we are giving money. It's just in a different order of operations. I know people are constantly asking me, is there a way to attach sustainability requirements to the tax credit, which is controlled by Aubenque? And I don't have the answer to that, but I'd love to hear from you, Jennifer, about some of the stuff that's happening along those lines that you're seeing in Canada.
Yeah, thanks, Shira. And yeah, Alissa, just a lot of what you were saying is giving us, giving me a lot of hope that, something like this could occur at more of a national level. And Shira, if you can make that happen in New York, you would be.
I'll get right on it.
Yeah. So what we have been seeing just in terms of funding, it's, through, crown corporations such as Telefilm, which is one of the biggest financiers for film in Canada, so across Canada. And, what they've done is really incredible, because they've not only kind of provided funding, but they've actually built their own sustainability, long-term plan for how they are going to integrate more sustainable production into the industry overall in Canada. So I think it's really comprehensive. And it's, it's a multi-year phased in program that's been very well thought through, based on national, directives and guidance that align with climate action throughout Canada. So it's really comprehensive. Right now they're in phase 2 of that telefilm. And it basically involves, 3 sort of different actions in their framework. So really, measuring and reporting. So that's a big one, because everybody's going to, have to do their carbon footprinting. And they're not really promoting any one calculator or anything, because, it's difficult to do that at this point with the different genres of production, the different sizes of production, the different budgets. So, they're just encouraging them to use the existing resources now, which there are many. And then also, the best practices in actual physical production. So pushing for advocacy of those practices, as well as promotion. So, accelerating implementation of sustainability best practices for film festivals throughout Canada. So that's great. And then there's also the Canadian Media Fund, which
so for film festivals, is that about kind of like the operation of a big event, or is that about the practices for the films that get considered to be accepted, or both?
I think it's both. So they do have, considerations for the individual films in terms of the criteria, kind of what you were saying, Alissa. There are some requirements. It's not quite as stringent. They're not all required to do a certification, but they all have to kind of have a plan. And the Canadian Media Fund also, it's it's supported by industry, so it's not technically a government-backed organization, but they do have support from the Canadian government, but it's more, an industry supported initiative. But they have changed their criteria for, for funding to incorporate different steps. And they're kind of trying to make it, I think, a little bit open at this point, because, what we're seeing and what we saw with Producing for the Planet, where this was our first, actually, we called it an action report year, where producers reported on their climate actions or their sustainability actions throughout this past year. And, what we're seeing, some of the key things that we saw were that, they're facing similar challenges everywhere. So funding obviously is a big one. And there were a lot of learnings there. So I think CMF, like organizations like CMF, Telefilm, even the film commissions, Ontario Green Screen, Real Green here in BC, and a lot of the film commissions throughout Canada are all trying to kind of support sustainable production, which is really promising, because, we're seeing it, like you're saying, Alyssa, going in the opposite direction in some regions. We're seeing it actually still really growing here, and we're seeing support for it here, in all regions throughout Canada, which we also will see when we have our national Real Green meeting every quarter, where we get, updates and input from and everybody around the country, which I find is really an amazing thing here in Canada, because, like you're saying, Shira, like I think one of the reasons that we have made such strides here in sustainability in the film industry is because there's so much collaboration. We share information, we're constantly, working with all the organizations, and now we're seeing, unions and guilds, like they're developing their own green committees, and, Producing for the Planet, it was just, it's an amazing organization, because it really has, is really focused on Canadian producers and providing that support where, where they really, really need it. Because, one of the things that, from the action report that we saw, was that only 10% of the reporting producers, were able to provide any kind of training. So, the action report was able to identify a lot of gaps for us in terms of what we can do, opportunities, what were the biggest challenges. So if you haven't seen it, I encourage everybody to kind of look it up. It's on the Producing for the Planet website. We could probably put a
In
link.
the chat, and then everyone can find it.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. But yeah, so
Kind of a good segue into the next theme, which was education and certifications. But before I do that, I want to do like a quick round robin of the panelists, because sometimes, I hear different things around whether or not industry wants a regulatory framework, and which of course there could be different ways. There could be a regulatory framework where you're getting more money for doing something, but there's also one that sends a clear messaging like, hey, you need to phase out diesel generators by, 2030 or what it might be. So without going, I know it's a complicated topic, but in a quick summary, I'll start with April. Do you think, like in your experience in your region, that that there's an appetite for government regulatory frameworks, or is it better to have sort of industry standards that everyone agrees to and says we'll try to commit to that? So April, what do you think?
Maybe a little bit of both. It's super complex. I think just speaking to our lived experience of having an industry-owned mandatory standard, which has been a phenomenal driver for change and engagement here in the UK, absolutely phenomenal, unquestionably so. And
You
we have the
explain
data
that, like,
to
how do you
show
have an
that.
industry-owned mandatory standard? What's
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Well, yes. So public service broadcasters, terrestrial broadcasters here in the UK, since COP26 in 2021, they decided to collectively say, we are going to require all of our productions that we commission to work towards the Albert certification. And so that created a level playing field of expectation. I think there was significant challenges for introducing a standard so quickly and without lots of kind of taking people along on the journey. However, it was able to absolutely supercharge engagement, and we went from having a few hundred certifications, voluntarily participating, which is nice, which is boutique, which is similar to what you see across other industries where there's no regulation, where you have a few people maybe getting B Corp or other environmental certifications like ISO, but it doesn't deeply penetrate and it doesn't hit, the scale that is required to start engaging, even on the most basic fundamentals, even on things like legal compliance, which you should be doing anyway, but being able to have a target and a way, kind of an assessment process where somebody external to your organization is actually checking that you've done the thing. So in this industry, because it was made mandatory by UK broadcasters, that meant that we went from a few hundred a year to about 2,500 last year that went
And so,
through.
not to be like redundant, but so basically the industry came up with their own standard through a collaborative process, and then the broadcasters said, okay, you came up with that standard and now we're making it mandatory for you to comply with your own standard. Is that kind of? No?
Sort of. Yeah, I mean, very simplistically, yes. Yeah. And how it was applied, I think different broadcasters would then require specific standards of their own. For example, we want you to absolutely eliminate plastics, or we want you to not use a generator if you're of a certain production type, or we want you, then they would be able to apply even like going beyond that minimum standard, right? Those minimum requirements. Really, it's a protocol, how it first started, and how it's evolving now is more of a framework to really push people and recognize people, because we're revising the certification now that will be in place next year that really looks at awarding higher scores for where you've had higher impact, higher effort, or lower effort, but higher impact actions that will then be able to properly recognize people. But your question about the role of, should it be government that requires it, like a legal requirement, I think also has a place. I think it has to be approached with caution and more of, you need to report. I think reporting has done a lot for the industry in terms with making people sit up and think, actually, we do need to be able to gather useful quality data that can then inform decision making and can help to, our sustainability people form that business case that's required. But also for, thinking about how how you can structure other initiatives that are going to be supportive as well. So the transition that's going to help the government meet their net zero goals, also industries need to be supporting that. So I think there's been a lot of reliance, and definitely in the UK, on market-based solutions. And I think that can go so far, but you come up with barriers that we all share, infrastructure again and again, whether it's waste management, recycling, looking at all sorts of different things, advertising, fossil fuel, a whole range of different things. But those things I think need to be working hand in hand. We need to pull in the same direction.
Okay, Sarah in Australia, what do you, I don't know, you said you guys were like 10 years behind the rest of the world or the rest of the industry. So what are you seeing?
Well, I think there's definitely been a catch up because there has, I think it was around COVID time, an industry owned organization that is related with BAFTA Albert called Sustainable Screens Australia, so the SSA. So, and that's creating mandatory reporting on a lot of production. So it's definitely, the industry has definitely kind of made leaps and bounds. And I think there's definitely an appetite with crew, especially the younger generations that really do value this. I think there's still, because there's such system changes and maybe upfront costs, I think there's still a long way to go, or there's still a lot to do. Like it's still quite a challenge, of course. And I think also with mandatory, like even with more funding or incentives, I think industry is kind of wanting, it's still a bit voluntary in some respect to kind of have industry incentives or mandatory goals or and I think there's just a bit of trepidation of putting extra burden on productions because they want the work. So I think it is good for all the states to align and everyone to be on the same page with this. And in Australia this year, the government has kind of started mandatory carbon footprint reporting for organisations of a certain size. So I think it's probably coming from, the pressure is coming. And yeah, hopefully it's like also, intrinsic organisations that really are championing this to kind of get on board and spearhead this. But I think it is like the carrot and the stick approach as well. So you kind of, there is that. So, but definitely, I would argue that I don't think we are 10 years behind anymore.
Okay.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. So, but yeah, it's been a great, and I think that's the other thing, connecting globally. So, we're working with Albert BAFTA with Sustainable Screens Australia. So, and that's definitely made a lot of inroads and got buy-in from a lot of the broadcasters and studios as well here. So, yeah, there's things to still be done, absolutely. But yeah, I know that there is an appetite.
So I guess Jennifer and Alissa, if you have other things to add on this sort of, it sounds like it's a both and, So if you have other thoughts, if not, you don't need to add them. If you do, I want to give you an opportunity and then we can move on to education and certifications.
Yeah, maybe just a quick thought. I think that what we are trying to do is do a system change. And so to do a system change, we cannot rely on just every production changing. We need to have systemic changes. But in order to have those systemic changes, of course, we need governments and institutions to make green production and sustainability mandatory. But we also need the industry to kind of understand it, like intrinsically, like to kind of that it comes also from them. Because if it's only, at least that's how we work in France, when the government tells us to do something that we usually are not complying, because we like to go on streets and demonstrate and like have demonstrations to show that we have our own opinion. So I really feel it's important that the rules that we have to be more sustainable are made by the industry for the industry, and then taken by the institutions to be amplified. But it really needs to be both like hand in hand, so that it's a long-lasting change, because we want it to be like change everything for the long term.
Like the systems change approach. And then Jennifer, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I have lots of thoughts, but this is something that we've thought a lot about in Canada, and there's so many challenges because, especially in a place like the US or Canada, the filming kind of hubs, they're all very different, right? So whatever approach it has to be, even though it's going to be hopefully a universal approach, will have to be very region specific, because what electrifying means in BC is different than what it means in Winnipeg, right? In the dead of winter. So we have to really focus on regional differences. But there is there are a lot of commonalities as well. And P4P, we're looking at, we have producer, voices from all over Canada. So that's really helpful, because what we're hearing is really, the different challenges and needs in all these different regions, but we're still trying to work together on how can we create it as, to make the job as easy as possible for the funding bodies to have some kind of like national, not necessarily a certification, but maybe a certification where they can actually, incentivize in a way that will be administratively possible to do. So that has been a really big challenge in Canada.
Thanks. So I wanted to switch a little bit to, I know a lot of you on the panel have your own certifications and do work sort of in what we would consider workforce development. So April, I mean, you kind of talked a little bit already about how that requirement for the broadcast to do certain things had a systems change effect, a little bit of shifting the culture so that productions, even if they weren't required to, started to try to get one of your certifications. So I want you to talk about that a little bit, but also about some of the work you did around something I think very different for people in the US, around national occupational standards for film and TV production, and how that kind of tied into understanding like the roles on set, and also how, I guess, to balance some of the industry that's popped up around trainings that may or may not be useful. So I don't know if you could kind of give a little framework around that.
Yeah, okay. So just, I guess, to clarify terms for folks in the audience, just the certification that we offer for production is like that framework criteria that the production itself completes. And then the National Occupational Standard would be something that for personal certifications, like, skills and training that people could pursue. So we have a task force on skills, our culture and capability task force, and they've been looking at there was a report, I think somebody's on the call actually, that one of the co-authors of this report from the University of Nottingham here did a review of kind of sustainability departments and the skills that were needed, and the need for these particular roles, sustainability coordinator, manager, assistant, for example, to have specific knowledge, skills, and behaviors for each of those roles, and expectations on what they would be able to deliver. And so our task force was looking at how do we actually put meaningful criteria together so those could be used in job descriptions, so that those could be standardized and used in the industry to create credible, pathways for people to get the training that they need, but also for productions to know what they would be able to deliver when they're on set. So they're not just you're hiring a sustainability coordinator and they'll sort your, bins your trash out. But actually, how can they help the production to meaningfully decarbonize? What is the strategy that a manager could help put into place? How do they talk to different heads of department, even talent and cast, producers, etc., to kind of get everybody to align on a key purpose? And then how is that delivered through coordinators or assistants, and then others throughout production? And how can they kind of support the embedding of that activity? And so we partnered with Screen Skills, which is a skills funded organization here in the UK that provides a lot of free at the point of use training. And they regularly create things called national occupational standards that form skills checklists and job description, help to create the substance that goes into a job description. And then, of course, the training that would come from that. So what we were seeing before was a lot of training popping up in the marketplace. People know that they need a sustainability coordinator. They're not quite sure what that person is going to deliver, and they're not quite sure what training they will have had or what experiences that they would have had to make sure that they actually know what they're doing when they arrive on set. And so some of the trainings were coming up that were lasting maybe a day, unstandardized curriculum, and some were 8 days with actual on-set experience and mentoring and shadowing. So the disparity between courses like that is pretty big. And at the end of the day, each of those courses would say, issue a certificate that basically says that you've been trained as a sustainability coordinator. So this will help to get training providers actually standardize curricula, and then a way to just check, first of all, that people meet those standards, but also that people that are entering that part of the industry that want to support the industry on sustainability know where they can go next. So if they start as an assistant, they will know how they'll be able to build their skills. And what we want to do is create kind of a pull mechanism for people to continue that learning, not just go on a training or go on a workshop and think that you've learned it and that's it, but actually providing ways for them to continue that learning process, which is a real challenge in an industry that relies on freelancers. So you want to be able to, allow people to get the skills that they need and clearly see how and where they can get it.
Love that. And so that's kind of connected too, because Alissa, you guys have some certifications where you also engage the academic community to help define those. So could you speak to those a little bit?
Yeah, so we provide kind of 3 different kinds of trainings. We provide trainings for students. And we actually launched a program to include sustainability modules in every university and film school in France, so that every student that comes out and gets into the industry has a basic knowledge of sustainability for our industry. Then the second trainings we offer are modules on sustainability for film professionals who want to better understand the stakes. So we offer general courses, but also very specific courses. For example, we have a course for directors or for set designers, but those would be very specific modules, like lasting 1 to 4 days. And then we have the expert courses, and those, it's kind of similar, like what April said. We have also a national body in France. And I think 3 years ago, they published, and we worked with them on that, a curriculum for expert-led like courses that would make you an expert on on sustainability in the film and TV industry. And so those courses are 2 to 3 weeks long. And right now we are also working with the same body to actually officially recognize the job of a green coordinator. So same thing as April, defining kind of the job description and making sure that the people who went through that training actually are recognized as sustainability coordinators. Also we have unions that kind of define the jobs here, and also the wages and the missions of the job. So yeah, including that new position into the teams in the course.
Cool. So I want to give a moment for everyone to kind of go through some of the resources they can share, but I wanted to address some of the questions in the chat. And so one of the questions was interesting, where Maria, but I'm probably mispronouncing her name, talked about using different tools, from some of them from the folks on the panel, to do carbon calculation and getting different results. And so I know for a while we were thinking about trying to use like the BAFTA Albert carbon calculating tool, and then because of the metric system, it was like, we couldn't figure that one out. So I know there are all these different tools, and it would be great, for one, not reinventing the wheel, and 2, for greater collaboration, since this is a global industry, to do that. But I think there are some questions about, how that works. So maybe especially for Jennifer and for, for Sarah, who's also working on these things as practitioners, how do you guys address, if you're working, trying to use these tools and that maybe they're not all fungible or you're not getting the same results? Can you guys talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Oh, I'll just say real quick, Sarah, thank you. No, I think that is, obviously something that we have all been kind of struggling with in terms of measuring and also reporting, because you get these vastly different results where, maybe one tool might be more designed for feature films, but for your smaller film or your short form commercial shoot, it doesn't really work. So there are different tools, there's Ad Green that we would sometimes use for this sort of shorter productions, mostly commercials. That's what it's kind of made for, and that works quite well. Where we would use something like Albert or Pear for like a bigger production. But I think one of the biggest things that I can't really recommend enough, and I have to kind of give a plug here, because we recently were starting to work with a company called the Green Shot. And the Green Shot, in terms of data collection, it is an absolute game changer, because not only does it,
Our last
yeah,
office hours was on carbon calculation and green
that's
shot.
right. Yeah. And that's right. And, as if some of you were able to sit in on that panel, very interesting. What it does is basically take away that challenge, that crux of data collection. So not only are you saving literally hours, because I have spent way too many hours of my whole life, like, looking at fuel receipts and one by one, and adding and, incorporating them into the carbon footprinting, where this can do this in, scan invoices, scan receipts, you're saving hours. But not only that, you're also getting way higher quality data. So your results are much better and more consistent. Because if any of you have done reporting working with accounting departments, bless their heart, they're amazing. However, you're not always getting what you're asking for, and you have a whole meeting in the beginning of production, like, this is what we need, these are the data points that we need with the terms, and and then what you get in the end is not that. And then having to chase that data it sucks, basically.
What I recall for green shot,
Yeah.
they have a menu of different standards that you can put in, and then it's going to spit out your dashboard that's going to be tailored to those different criteria. So
Yeah.
Sarah,
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say, if you're measuring across, like if you're a studio production and you want to do something where you're measuring all of your production, it creates this consistency that is so helpful when you're developing your KPIs, because then you actually have data that is based on, very similar quality integrity. So yeah, I think it's definitely check. And there's other options as well, but Green Shot is one that we've used.
cool. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Well, Jennifer, I have to say I'd be very keen to see that one because like that sounds amazing. I think the biggest thing for me is getting as much accurate data as possible, because I think that is very, very important, because yeah, you don't want to have missing data, and I think getting the right data is really important. I've used both the pitch and pear and the Albert carbon footprints. So they're the ones that I've used. And I find it really depends on the production. So some of the productions require one or the other. But yes, I think for me, it's just something that you kind of have to do, like set up right at the start, get accounts involved. And I think it's, there's always room for improvement to get the data as accurate as possible. I think also just because of the actual practicality of everything as well, because productions are kind of moving beasts almost, some of it is still quite estimatory. So it's, I think that's the thing, like, yeah, I think you could really have a whole team full time getting as much of data as possible. So, but I think in like on big productions as well, once it's so important to get the system right at the start, knowing what you need to get, and then you can kind of put it in either. That's my experience anyway. So it's just making sure that you get that data and in the first place, and then you can use different calculators and you can find out what they spit out as results. But yeah, I think it's definitely an emerging thing. But having something unified, I think, is also good as well, so that everyone's kind of on the same page a little bit.
April, I was going to ask you a question, but you have your hand up, so I think that.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about a few things. I think with carbon calculators, I think it's amazing how the industry engages with carbon calculating tools. And I know the Albert current version of the toolkit was really developed to just get people to learn and engage and understand what their hotspots are and really shift to the carbon action plan side of things. But because the regulatory landscape has changed so much, and commissioners or funders are needing to get more accurate data that will address their scope 3 emissions, there's a lot more pressure on actually having tools that can be that can extract data so it can be used in corporate reporting. So that's a big thing that we've been doing to reinvigorate our toolkit. But just in terms of the alignment between the different tools, I think one of the things is, first of all, we have to align on a methodology on what is in and what is out of a production level carbon footprint. We've been collaborating over the last 9 months, 10 months with the Sustainable Entertainment Alliance in the US on a scope 1 and 2 white paper. They published early last year in 2024, a scope 3 white paper, which was pretty straightforward, which was great. But actually, we need the full scope 1, 2, and 3 so that any calculator knows what does, moving from a production's footprint to actually the production's greenhouse gas declaration that has all 3 scopes outlined. And then the role of, how people actually engage with these different calculators. So if you set aside if all the methodologies for the tool are correct, it's actually, are people using it correctly and to what standard? And who's checking to make sure that it's complete and accurate? And then how do you streamline that user experience? So it's really simple, easy, automated as much as possible, and data are extracted from the right places and from the right people. And then what do you use the data for? And how do you visualize the results? How do you learn? And how do you action so that it can be used for actual decarbonization? So just a few things that I wanted to share there. And also in that scope 1 and 2 white paper that we're publishing this month, there will be a data hierarchy on there as well. So you can see, it will push people to, where possible, get your primary data, and then what the role of secondary or proxy data are, and how that can help people think of how they address, what those emissions look like. Who do they engage with? Is it the supplier? Is it the production team? Or is it the commissioner?
So I guess the answer is there is no simple answer. There's a lot of different factors why those outputs might be different, but it also sounds like we have some resources and tools either that are already available that folks might not have known about, and also that are going to be coming online. So I have a question though, April and Alissa, and I don't know if it's Alissa or Alissa, so I apologize if I've been mispronouncing your name. Is for these certifications. So I know, we have a Made in New York PA training program, and we've had some discussions about, should we create an eco PA, a green PA, offshoot of that, which we have yet to do. So for folks who live in places where there aren't these certifications and they're interested, for April and Alissa, do you think that there's any benefit to taking an international certification that it's international, it's from another place, but it might not have international applicability? One, are you able to take your certifications if you don't live in France or in the UK? And if you can, is there a benefit, say, if you live in LA or New York City, to have that kind of certification? Alissa, do you want to go first? And you can tell me if I've been mispronouncing your name.
Okay. I have a lot of ways of pronouncing my names and everything. I like every way you are pronouncing it. So the trainings that we provide that are the certifying trainings to be a sustainability coordinators, we are doing them only in France and only on site. because we feel like it's important also to actually go on set and have that also in-person exchange. I guess sustainability is both global and very local. So it's always difficult. And I think it's the same answer for like labels and certification schemes or carbon calculators. It's like we all would want one system that works everywhere, but we do have differences in the ways we are working and we are producing, and also in the ways we are structured as countries and how sustainability fits into that. For example, in France, we have mostly nuclear energy, so we have less focus maybe on decarbonization of energy and that topic, which might be a bigger topic, for example, in Germany, where the energy has a very high emission factor. So I think sustainability is kind of the same for everyone. We need to use less energy, less transportation, create less waste. So those are things that we can learn on a global scale. But then the important thing that we need to learn is how do we actually implement those sustainability guidelines into our everyday work. And this is where it might be different from one country to the other. Having said that, we have been working with the Council of Europe and EURIMAG, which is the film fund of the Council of Europe, to create the e-learning platform, which is called Step Up, where we provide, I would say, basic introduction to sustainability for the film industry as a free course. And then we have a more advanced course to kind of dive deeper into the topic of sustainability for co-productions. So there are some programs available that are more like international, but I guess sustainability coordinators, I would say, yeah, it's maybe more national level.
And then April, I guess you more have like e-learning modules and things like that that people in the industry could take. And do you think those are valuable if you don't live in your jurisdiction?
So the e-learning that's available that we have is through a partnership with Screen Skills, which is for the UK. I'm not sure if it's accessible if you're outside the UK, to be honest. We have training that we offer our workshops. Obviously, they're in our time zone and they're developed for the UK production industry specifically. But I mean, most of the trainings that we have are training, certification, any of our tools are free at the point of use. And so your question of who can access them, you know, strategically, we're looking for organizations, kind of convening organizations globally that need some support and that we can provide. So we can provide essentially access to our toolkit, our training, our materials, our methodology. We can train assessors, we can train trainers. But to Alicia's point, we need, in order to achieve scale, that's not going to be done by a small team in London helping the global production industry decarbonize properly in the right language with the right cultural context and all the nuanced kind of alterations that are needed to make it fit for purpose globally. And that's where we partner with international organizations like Sustainable Screen Australia, and others as well, so that we can essentially kind of say, here's the box of everything you need to know, and actually the hand-holding that we provide so that people know how they can access it, how they can support their industry locally, how we can also take on feedback to how to adapt our tools in those areas. There's also, there may be further opportunities in terms of people actually accessing our certification in the future globally. I'm not sure what that looks like, but generally, wherever we have an international partnership in place, then it would be the partner organization that would certify, and we certify that organization to be able to issue those certifications and to be able to provide those tools.
Amazing. So there's one more question from the chat, which I'll ask folks quickly, and then I want to be mindful of our time. So someone was asking about plant-based meals as a strategy, and I know, sometimes composting has already come up. So sometimes when I talk to folks, it seems like decarbonization from a fuel perspective is the main focus, but of course there's greenhouse gas component to eating animals that produce methane and things like that. So I wonder for everyone where the meals served on a production fits into your kind of hierarchy of things you're focused on. Sarah, you want to kick off since we're talking about compost?
Yeah, definitely. And it's really fascinating actually when you look at what carbon footprint different foods have. I was a bit disappointed cheese is actually quite high on there, so it's a bit disappointing. But look, I think some of this is definitely cultural. I found like it really does depend on who you're working with and what the culture is. I've worked on some productions where we had a producer who said, let's have a vegan, vegetarian Friday. And she was very passionate about this. And I thought like some of the crew loved it. Some of the crew were like, well, I'm going to go get my burger from somewhere else on Friday. So I think it really does depend on that culture, who you're working with, where people are at, maybe. But definitely, I think it is definitely a touchy subject. And there have been different ways to work around it. So instead of, like having like a big steak, maybe have shredded meat and maybe use less of it, or kind of like different ways that the catering can like work with it. But it's definitely, I mean, it's definitely something I think that is really important. But there is just it's fascinating work because there is a lot to it, but it does seem to be one that is, it gets quite passionate with certain people, but other people are like, yeah, no worries, I'm fine to eat a vegetarian day and it's maybe healthier. But
Jennifer,
yeah, definitely.
across your work on consulting.
Yeah. Mm.
Sorry, yeah. So the plant-based question, yeah. So yeah, it's it's definitely something that is high on our list. So when we start production, and this is why, I mean, it's all this training stuff that we're talking about. Honestly, it's so important for people to have this kind of like baseline knowledge of like, what are we talking about? Like what are the issues here? And like they're different for every department. So it kind of, I like how Albert has kind of divided up some of the training to department specific information, because I think, there's a lot of general courses out there. I mean, I've had people that have taken a certification course and then finish it, get certified, and then call me and be like, what do I do? I don't know how to do it. And it's like, okay, so what we really need to do is get that hands-on training that we were all talking about, because like I said before, it's in every region, it's different. And we have to bring in the suppliers, the supply chain, because we are so dependent on how they do things in order for us to make our work more successful and to have better results. So there's no substitute for really the hands-on services. And even with plant-based, it's kind of going in, having that conversation with every department head ahead of time. And that's something that we always talk about is, would you consider this? And here's some solutions. Here's some vendors locally that can help us with that. And, we can talk about doing that. I mean, I worked on a feature for Disney in Alberta, which is cattle country, right? And I brought up the idea of let's do a meatless Monday, and they were like, there's no way, But what we did is we came up with a really workable solution where we switched with catering and craft for one of them to have no meat on one day and one to have no meat on another day. So it was available somewhere else on the set, but you coming up with those kind of creative solutions that you'll never really learn that in a certification course or any kind of training. It's something that you have to just work with the crew and the suppliers and figure it out. So yeah.
April.
Like temporary power, it's one of those things that is actually within the control of the production. And we measure the impact of catering under our materials section, and it's a whopping half of the footprint of materials of a production. Although I have to say, probably materials are underestimated because we don't have full life cycle data on the washing machines that would have been purchased or all the timber, etc. but it's a significant proportion. And if we look at, if we were to distill that into what is on the menus, red meat is the really high carbon option. And so there is a really great case if you want to decarbonize your production, and there's easy wins: get rid of diesel and get rid of red meat. It doesn't mean you're getting rid of all meat, but it is radically reducing the footprint of your catering. And then, yeah, to Sarah and Jennifer's point, if you look at the volume, less and better as well, is also something to really think about. But those are, in terms of quick wins, things that people probably won't notice at all. You're not making them do without. You're just shifting to something slightly different, and it should still be a tasty meal for them. But that is definitely a big focus area for us.
So we were almost out of time. So I wanted to note two things, which I'm going to speak on behalf of the panelists because of time. So when Alissa and I were talking, she had mentioned they have a directory of sustainable vendors, but that they actually have an application process, which I thought was really interesting because it added a level of scrutiny to possible greenwashing, which then an organization might be associated with. So that was interesting. The issue of hydrogen generators came up. So Sarah said that was being used maybe in New Zealand or some other places, which I don't hear about that really being used too much in New York. So those were some of the interesting trends, as well as just as, different shifts in the industry happen and there's more shooting in different places around the world, that there are sustainability professionals kind of propping up an insight into this industry around the globe, making it, I guess, a challenge for cities like New York that they want to retain production here, but that as, productions look to maybe shoot in different locations as well, that these resources are starting to be more global, which has, I guess, a double-edged sword for cities trying to attract, or regions trying to attract film production that might have a higher cost point. But so one, I'm going to have all the panelists who are amazing share either in the chat or with me, and we can distribute it, resources that they want to distribute for everyone who's been on attending, so that we can start to kind of globalize access to things that would be helpful for all of us. And then I just wanted to end by having our panelists talk about something they are looking forward to, which is something I started doing. So I'll start with you, Sarah. What's something you're looking forward to?
Okay, one of my really the hopeful things I want is less pushback and everyone on the same page. I still find there's sometimes two steps forward, one step back on certain productions, and there is, yeah. So I just hope that's what I'm looking forward to, when you're kind of working on a production and everyone's on the same page, we're all working together, and there's no more pushback. Or a lot less pushback anyway.
Jennifer.
Well, lots of things that I'm looking forward to, but I have to say, because my daughter's actually a film student in New York, actually. And she's very involved with the Green Film School Alliance, which is initiative that is, based out of the Sustainable Entertainment Alliance. And I would just love to see, I was inspired, Alissa, to hear that you guys are doing that in France. Sounds like you guys are doing amazing things in France. So we'd love to see these types of training programs, like maybe with internships or hands-on training, where students will get to go onto some things that are filming in New York and actually have that hands-on experience, and maybe bring the faculty along, because that was one of the biggest things that I heard when I was teaching the students in different film schools around Vancouver, like, you should be giving this course to the faculty, because, we just need everybody to be informed. But if they're actually learning it in a way that is sustainable, then they'll come out of film school, doing it a certain way. And it's just production. It's not even sustainable production. It's just how they do it. So I would love to see that for future filmmakers. And, I think if we're more sustainable, we'll be able to continue to make beautiful films in a sustainable way for the future. So, yeah.
Alissa, what are you looking forward to?
I think I'm looking forward to the day I don't have to explain why sustainability is important for the film, TV, and advertising industries. Sometimes I feel I've reached that point where we all understand what's at stake, and then I have a producer coming to me saying, oh, you know, I've been doing green production. We had only reusable bottles on my set. And I'm like, okay, so we need to get a little bit further than that. So yeah, that's the thing I'm looking forward to. But I think slowly we're getting there.
Okay. April, how about you?
Quite a lot of things, but I think mostly it's seeing the embedding of sustainability skills in the industry, you know, these key roles, seeing that sustainability department being really valued and seeing people find a pathway into the industry there where they can really help their productions decarbonize, but also supporting, you know, there's some really interesting things happening around climate content, which we haven't talked about today, and storytelling, and how, you know, impact producing can really make a huge difference. But I think just in terms of people are going to help to make this change and getting people into more sustainability roles, and also in other non-sustainability roles, getting heads of department really understanding the impact that they can have, the impact of the producer or a director, the cultural influence that they have over the direction of travel in terms of decarbonization in the production can't be overstated. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that more and more.
That I guess I'm, listening to this conversation, I'm looking forward to kind of taking some of the ideas that I'm hearing from around the globe and trying to incorporate them for New York. I think sometimes it's a flip side because it can be daunting when you feel that, oh, there's so much we haven't done, but the flip side of that is, oh, there's so many things we can still do. And there are all these partnerships and learnings out there. So that something I'm looking forward to. And of course, our next Film Green office hours, which I don't know the date of off the top of my head, which I should, but I will be circulating that. So I want to give a big thank you to all of our panelists who, for Sarah, it's like 2 a.m. or something like that. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you to everyone who tunes in and sticks around through a long panel. And we're going to distribute the recording. We're going to distribute a bunch of resources. And I look forward to seeing you all again next month. Okay, take care, everyone.
Thank you.